Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Jefferson City Christian Church. We're so glad that you are here with us. Let's stand together this morning. We are going to do worship a little bit differently today. It's not technically acoustic because you can see all these wires. We're definitely plugged in. But we're going to do some older songs in a little bit of a semi-bluegrassy kind of way. I can't play the mandolin, so I'm playing a ukulele. So we're doing that. But I just wanted to say that as we get into these songs, John and I were talking about worship, and I know we talk about the songs that we choose and the heart behind them. We want to allow everybody the opportunity to really worship. And for a lot of younger people, that means newer songs, and for a lot of older people, that means older songs. For people that grew up in the church like me, the old and the new songs are just as meaningful and just as moving. So I know a lot of you fit that category too. So we'd love to hear you sing it out and hopefully clap along with us. Well, I guess we won't be clapping, but you might be clapping. We're all doing them. So we'd love to hear you clap. So let's sing this together. 1, 2, 3, 4. You may be seated.
My name is Tom Filling. I want to welcome everybody to Jefferson Christian Church, especially to our visitors. Before we go any further, I just want to tell you a little bit about our church. We celebrate communion every week at the end of our service. Any follower of Jesus is welcome to join us. Just take a piece of bread, a cup of juice when they're passed. Spend some time and reflect on what Jesus did for us. Eat when you're ready. Another thing, our prayer cards. You can see those in the pew in front of you. Just fill them out for people that really need encouragement. Simply fill out the card. If you don't think they go to church here, fill out their address on the back of the card and then either drop it in the offering plate or the tie box at the back of the church. If you want to find more information about our church, check out the new gear brochure that's in the pew in front of you. Another way to connect with us is coming up on July 29th. Instead of lunch, we're doing brunch, starting at 10:45 for the early service. But don't worry, late service will still be served until 1 o'clock. Watch out for the menu on next week's bulletin. Friends, that's all from me. And again, I'm so thrilled that you're here with us today, and hope everyone has a great Sunday.
Well, good morning. We do hope that you guys are having a great Sunday so far. Thank you guys so much for the worship this morning. My name is Lee Emmerich. I am continuing the series that we are doing here on the book of Esther. John's been up for a couple of weeks, and now I'm going to be up here for 2 or 3 weeks and to help you guys out and going through the book of Esther. We've had so much fun doing this. Once again, I want to remind you guys that you can see these messages on YouTube, on our YouTube channel. Also, if you want to follow along with the notes that we're preparing, they're in the back in the foyer area. All you have to do is get you a small notebook that we bought for you. Put your paper in the clips. Now, I know John's been giving you a hard time about the clips, too, about the fact that during this whole process, at some point, we all have to clip together. So if you want to do that now, you can do that now. I'll give you just a second to clip it now, or you can wait till the end of the service. You can clip it at the end. Because I understand sometimes we are note takers that like to clip at the end. There's what? No. Okay, well then, you can figure that out yourself. Man. I don't know, man. I don't know what to say. So there's no holes. Well then, there you go. That's part of the process. Today we're going to be talking about difficulty. No, it's all part of the process, people. It's all part of the process. But we are talking about the book of Esther. And I have been reading through this book, but in the summertime, you find yourself reading other books. And I've been reading through the book of Esther, but I've also decided I'm going to get out and I'm going to read something that I want to read or some things that I've heard that people tell me to read. And so I picked up a science fiction book that somebody said, hey, well, part of the reason is because I have a son. And Bobby, who loves to play video games, he's a gamer. I guess he is a gamer. He plays a lot of video games when he gets the chance. But because we definitely set a time limit on that. But because he would just sit there all day and night and play video games if we didn't. But he's kind of a gamer, and so I saw this book, or I heard about this book called Ready Player One, because it's about video games. Has anybody read this book? Raise your hand. Yeah? Have y'all read this book? Okay, so a couple of people have read this book. I grew up in the 80s too, and I have a lot of 80s memories, and I also played video games in the 80s as well. And so it was kind of good for me, and good for a lot of reasons, and it's good to get my head into something else. It's a science fiction book, and I'm just going to set it up, but I promise you, because there's a movie coming out. I know we all like to watch movies and read books and things. I'm not going to give away anything, so before you run out the back and close your ears, don't worry. I'm not going to give anything up. But basically it's set in this futuristic world later on where the world is a little bit of chaos. The world's in chaos because we've kind of depleted a lot of the resources. There's an energy crisis, and a lot of people are living in poverty. And so we meet the characters in this setting where they're in poverty. But in all of this, we see these video games that the main character loves to play. And in the gamer world, one of the things that changed not just the reality of the gamers, but also the reality of people is this guy named James Holliday. He created video games, but later on in life, he created what he called the Oasis, okay? The ultimate virtual reality video game experience, okay? And so he created this thing called the Oasis, and it became so popular, it was virtual reality. You could enter the Oasis with goggles, and you could play virtual games. everywhere. And then you can find yourself playing 80s video games and the early classic video games within the virtual world. Well, what ends up happening over the years is that people start looking at this oasis as like a alternate reality. Okay, so because the world they live in is like poverty, ravished with poverty, it's got an energy crisis, and so nobody's really happy. They've become to choose the oasis above the reality. So they're spending 15, 16, 17 hours a day in the oasis. People everywhere, okay? Well, long story short, because I know, again, when I say read this book, there's some salty language in here. So I'm not promoting, if you don't want to read the book, that's fine too, but I should tell you that too, so let me just get that out of the way so you don't say, we told you to read this, blah, blah, blah. Read it before you let your kids read it. It's not a kid's book, in my opinion. You need to read it for yourselves. So I'll go back to the book. So they create this oasis, and what happens is people begin to choose this oasis over reality. The creator of the oasis, a guy named James Holliday, ends up dying, and he ends up putting in the oasis a game. He calls it the Easter egg. Now, if you're a gamer, you know what an Easter egg is. An Easter egg is this thing within the game. It's like this hidden thing within the game that you find that actually, it started out as just kind of a hidden thing, like maybe the creator of the game put something in there, like maybe their name, or they put something in there for you to find. It's not like in the rule book. They don't tell you how it is. You just have to play it long enough to find the Easter egg within the game. And then it became to where they would put Easter eggs within games that would actually help you win the game. Like, now, I'll just tell you this. When I told you, I played 80s games. There was a game called Contra. Anybody here Contra fans? Anybody know the Easter egg in Contra? Okay, up, up, down, down, left, right, BA start. I just did that. Haven't played this thing in 30 years, okay? Okay, and I just remembered that. And then I was like, yep, that's the Easter egg. If you did that before the game went into start mode, you got 40 extra lives, which really helps you out to win the game. When you have 40 lives, to start the game. So I would do, up, up, down, down, left, right, BA start before the game started, and I had 40 lives. I usually won contract. Okay? I was the best at it, right? So he puts this Easter egg inside the oasis, okay? And he says his dying wish is for somebody to find this Easter egg. He had no family to give his fortune to, so he ends up making it this world reality in the oasis to find the Easter egg. And then if you get it, you win billions of dollars, his whole life savings. So what happens is you have all of these people who have chosen the oasis as their reality, searching for the Easter egg. Okay? And you have two types of people. These people they call the Gunters. The Gunters are these purists. They are the purists who play video games for themselves, and they're all searching for the Easter egg, but there's this unwritten honor code that you play for yourself, and even if you play it together, you win this thing on your own, by your own knowledge, and you're like a purist. You're going to play fair. But then there's this opposite group called the Sixers. Now, the Sixers banded together to make this alliance, and they're winning the game at all costs. They're the same thing. They're gamers, but they're cheating, in other words. But what you find out about the Sixers is that they are not only willing to cheat inside the game, they're willing to go at all costs outside the game. They'll kill you on the outside of the game if you're getting ahead. And so they start, and so there's this book between these people who are all chasing after this one thing, this Easter egg. Now, I started reading this book, and as you do, you start to read things, both secular things and both biblical things. You see some kind of crossover, because I think we all are human, and we all have these human things going on. And I think there's some things going on here in the book that I think we all deal with. In other words, let me ask you a question. Have you ever found yourself unhappy in the reality that you find yourself in? You're unhappy with your job. You're unhappy with your marriage. You're unhappy because you're married, but you don't have kids, so you think, if I have kids, I'll be happy. You're maybe single and looking for that person that will fulfill your happiness, because that's what we do when we're unhappy, right? We get unhappy in the reality that we find ourselves in, so we go searching for the things like our Easter egg that will fix it, right? That thing that will make us happy again. That thing that will make our reality so much better. And so we find ourselves living in the unhappiness of the reality we have and searching for the things that will make us happy. These Easter, this secret thing that we all have. And everybody's Easter egg is different. Everybody's different in the thing that they feel will give them happiness. And let me ask you a question. Have you ever found that thing that you thought would finally bring you happiness, that thing that would finally get you where you wanted to be, and then find out that it wasn't what you thought it was? That thing that you thought would bring you finally, I'm going to win that. I'm going to move forward, and then you got it, and then you figure out, wait a second, it's not what I thought. But let me ask you another question. Have you ever gotten what you thought would make you happy, and then you look back and you realize that you have hurt people in the process in your pursuit of happiness? That thing that you thought you wanted. Right? That thing that in your search for happiness, it has brought conflict with the people around you, and even within yourself and the people around you. I'm calling that our Easter egg, but in fact, I'm calling that a bad egg. That right there is just a bad egg. It's that thing in our lives, that thing that we pursue that makes us happy, but it leads us into conflict with ourselves and the people around us. We just want to be happy. We're just searching for our happiness. But in return, we get conflict. We get problems within ourselves, but we also start to hurt the people around us in our pursuit of what that thing is. And some of us may have some bad eggs in our life, and I want to talk about that. There's this verse in the book of James in the New Testament, and it's very revealing, this biblical concept that James writes about. He says, "What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you can't get what you want, so you quarrel and you fight." And I think a lot of us find ourselves a lot of times in conflict. And what's brought about the conflict in our lives is our own personal desires, our own personal wants of something that we just don't have and we're trying to get it. Something we want, but we don't have it. Or something somebody else wants, but we can't get it. Because in the book, you have this leaderboard that they're trying to chase up and to be number one, because everybody gets points for accomplishing certain things, and you always want to be number one on the leaderboard. Is it true, though, that we don't have leaderboards in our own lives? We look on Facebook, we look on Twitter, and we compare ourselves to other people, and we think to ourselves, I want to be better than that. I mean, I have a nice house, but they seem to have something better than I do, and I have a good life, but their life seems to be better than mine. So we're not saying that we don't like them, we just want to be above them in some way, form, or fashion. And so we're striving against each other somehow in this race to be happy, to get what they have. What is it that they have? What is it that they have that I don't have? How can they get this and I don't have this? And so we sort of do find ourselves chasing leaderboards and chasing other people and comparing ourselves to other people, don't we? And the reason I bring all of this up is because in the 7th chapter of Esther, the 6th chapter of Esther, we find ourselves revealing this part of Esther, which is kind of this is like a classic part. I love this part of Esther because this is like the turn. This is like the kind of the climax of the story where everything starts to make sense. But it also is this part of Esther where you see something about one of the main characters, Haman, who has been causing all the conflict in the story. He's like the instigator of all the conflict. He's like the instigator of everything. And then you start to realize in this section here, if you're looking for it, why he brings so much conflict to this story. And I want to start to read this, and I want to talk about this for a second, because I think it's interesting, because we look at Haman, and we look at his life, and then we look at this one situation, and then you see this character study of Haman, this personality thing that if you didn't read it closely, you wouldn't catch it. It says in Esther chapter 2 that the night before, the King Xerxes, could not sleep. And so he ordered the book of Chronicles. In other words, he ordered the book of his life, and he just wanted to read over it. And the record of his high reign to be brought, and he wanted it to be read to him. So he found a record that Mordecai, which is another character in the story, Esther's cousin Mordecai, had exposed Bigthana and Teresh. This happened in chapter 2. Two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. So back in chapter 2, we read that Mordecai had exposed this assassination attempt on King Xerxes. And he told Esther, and Esther told the king, and it stopped this assassination attempt. And then Queen Esther ends up giving the credit to Mordecai. So it was written down in the book of Chronicles that this happened, and he had forgotten about it. And so something is bugging him at night. He wakes up, he reads this story, and he thinks, wait a second, what's been done for this guy? Well, did we ever thank you? I mean, he saved my life. And so he's asking around. He's like, no, nothing's been really done for him. And it just so happens that Haman is outside the door. And so he calls Haman in, who is like now second in command. And he says, Haman, has anything been done for this guy? In fact, we read in Esther chapter 6 that Haman actually, when he says, I want to honor somebody. I want to honor somebody who has done a lot of things, who has saved my life. And it says in Esther chapter 6 that in the back of his mind, he's thinking, well, who is there in the king would rather honor than me? In other words, Haman thinks he's called him in to honor him. He doesn't know why he's called him in. He just knows he wants to honor somebody. And he thinks that the king Xerxes wants to honor him. So he answers the king, for the man the king delights to honor. Have them, and get this, bring the royal robe the king has worn on a horse. The king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed upon his head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe, the robe and the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what should be done for the man the king delights to honor. Now, I want you to stop here and I want you to think about what his request is, what he thinks is him. I want the king's robe to wear. I want the king's horse to ride. I want the crest for everyone to see. And what you realize is Haman has an end game that nobody sees in this story. Haman's Easter egg is he wants to be king. Haman is not satisfied with being number two. Haman wants to be the king. Haman wants to be number one. And that's what's going to finally bring him happiness. He's not satisfied with being a governor, and he's not satisfied with being promoted, and he's not satisfied with all of these things that he's been given. In fact, he's upset because he's not king, and that's his end game. And I'm curious, is this what's bringing about all this conflict? And then you start to understand a little bit more about Haman and why he's so threatened by Mordecai. Because if you look at the history between his people and the Jewish people, and the fact that his people were always in battle with the Jewish people, he couldn't be king with a bunch of Jews around because he would never be respected by them. And so respect for a king is like number one. And so in his mind, he's got to get rid of the people who don't respect him. And the reason he's talking to the king like this is because he wants everybody to see him paraded around with the king's crest, with a prince beneath him, and cheering for him. Because it's just going to set him up for the future. This is going to make Haman's day, right? He's going to get one step closer to the thing that he's been hunting his whole life. This thing that's going to help him win the game. His game. And this is when God, I think, has a sense of humor. This is when you see God at work in this story. Because God does something to Haman that he is not prepared for. It says in Esther chapter 6, then go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and get the horse. Do just as you have suggested for who? Mordecai, the Jew who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you've recommended. Afterward, it says, Mordecai gets this guy. He has to parade him around the kingdom thinking to himself, I wish I were up there. That's where I want to be. And now he gets promoted. He's done it. This is the guy he's trying to kill. This is the guy he's eventually going to kill. This is a guy he can't stand. And he has to parade him around all through town, dressed like a king, looking like a king, being cheered at like a king, when he himself wants to be king. It says Mordecai returned to the king's gate. Haman, he went home with his head covered in grief and told Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends everything that had happened. Can you imagine that conversation? Going home and crying to all of his friends in grief. Would you believe what happened to me? Can you believe what happened to me? And talking to his wife about all these horrible things that King Xerxes did to him. What kind of man is he? Well, he's a man who still hasn't gotten what he wants. He's a man who wants to be king. And he's a man who's willing to do anything to get it. And he's depressed when he doesn't get it. And if anybody threatens, he's going to kill him. Now, I look at Haman, and I think to myself, this is a horrible guy. This guy is blinded by his own success. He's blinded by his own happiness, right? He's blinded by his Easter egg, right? That thing that he thinks that is finally going to get him ahead in the game. But then we have to ask ourselves, do you and I have an Easter egg in our life? Or more importantly, do we have a bad egg in our life? Is there something in our life that we're pursuing for our happiness that's hurting us and hurting the people around us? Is there something in our life that we've been pursuing for a long time? And so I want to give you a couple of things up here to identify. And here's the thing, there's a little bitty empty spot right next to that. I don't want you to fill it out right now until you ask these questions. Because maybe by answering these questions on the screen, you can figure out what your egg is and if it's a bad egg. In other words, let me ask you some questions. Is there anything in your life that makes you feel anxious or angry or depressed? Is there anything you're pursuing that you don't have, and because you don't have it right now, or because you're not pleased in it, it's making you angry or anxious or depressed? When is the last time that you got angry? When is the last time you were anxious, unsettled? When is the last time you were just depressed? And what was it about? Is there anything that has led you to make a bad decision? I mean, you look back and in your pursuit of whatever that is, whatever it is, maybe you're unsatisfied, so you think, I got to do this and I got to make this decision. And then you look back at the decision that you made and you think, man, what was I thinking? I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I bought that. I can't believe I said that. I was just trying to get ahead. I was just trying to make myself happy. And we could say, well, I was just trying to make the people around me happy. It's not really about me, it's about them. But then you look at it and think, no, it's about me. But it's made you depressed, anxious, angry, and it's led you to make some decisions that you regret. And finally, has it led you to hurt the people around you? I mean, have you had conversations with your spouse, your children, your co-workers, your friends? And you realize that thing that you're pursuing has led you to make not only bad decisions, but those decisions has ended up hurting you, or it's hurt the people around you. I mean, I just have to stay late. I just have to work more. And then you realize that you've done it so many times that the people around you don't see you anymore. And you're thinking, why do we have that relationship? Why is there anger in the house, right? Or maybe you've worked so hard at doing that thing in that business that you're so focused on making it that maybe you cut a corner here, forgot to dot an I or cross a T here, forgot to mention that here. And all of a sudden you find yourself in a situation where you cut so many corners, maybe it's not even right anymore if anybody found out. But it's ended up hurting you, and it's ending up hurting the people around you. And again, I don't want you to feel that out, but when you start to answer these questions, you start to realize maybe I have a bad egg in my life. Maybe I have something that I've been pursuing. Haman wanted to be king. What do you want? What will make you happy? It says that Haman was asking his friends and his wife, and then you find out something from none other than his wife that's giving some pretty good advice to his friends. She says, Haman, since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you can't stand against him. You'll surely come to ruin. Haman, there's something about Mordecai. Ever since you got involved with this guy, you've been trying to take him down. But there's something about his origin. There's something about Mordecai that you can't win. You can't beat him. He's got something you'll never have. And I think when she said, it's his Jewish origin. And here's the thing about his Jewish origin. His God. He believed in God, Yahweh, the one true God, the creator of game. The thing that brings everything together. And then you look at something that he knows that Haman will never know because he doesn't believe in that God. And it's this, God's Easter egg of contentment. Within this game, this reality that God has created, he has created for us this word called contentment that I think all of us need to learn. And it's interesting that in the New Testament, a writer in the New Testament by the name of Paul describes this as a secret, something that we have to realize ourselves. He says in the book of Philippians, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. In other words, I know the good times, and I know the bad times. I know the times that I need, and I know the times that I don't need, and I know the times that I'm okay, and I know the times that I'm not okay, and when things are going well in my life, and I know everything that's going on, and I understand my life, and then there's times that I have really questions, like, what is God doing in my life? I don't understand what God's doing in my life, and I don't understand why my life is going this direction. Why am I getting this news? In fact, he's writing this as he's sitting in prison for preaching the gospel. This is the reflection he's having in prison. He said, I know what it is to be needy. I know what it is to have plenty. But I've learned this, what he calls secret. This secret of being content in every situation. Whether well-fed or hungry, living in plenty or living in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. I have found this secret called contentment. I have found that in the good times and the bad times, I'm not going to go one way or the other. I'm going to go with God. And then you look at Mordecai throughout this entire story, and you look at the ups and the downs of Mordecai. Like when this story began, he was living in exile. He had been living in a land that was not his own. He had been a slave, so that's bad. But he had found a pretty good job at the king's gate. He was living at the king's gate. That's a pretty good job. You're close to the king. It's pretty good pay, I'm sure. Right? So Mordecai is living in exile, but has a good job. But then this job is not good enough to save his cousin Esther, who is taken to this horrible pageant, came up from people above him. It's not enough to save his cousin. So he has to watch his cousin be trotted off and put into this pageant that's exploiting her and that's hurting her physically, I'm sure, and mentally and emotionally. And so he's got to watch that happen. So this is not a good time for him. And so he ends up getting an assassination stopped, right? I mean, he ends up, because of his job, he ends up hearing about assassination. He tells Esther, who is at that time becoming queen. And that's good, right? Because Esther's giving him the credit. He doesn't know that. But he ends up doing something good, so that's a good thing. But then the next chapter, he finds out that he and all of his people, because of his disrespect for Haman, he's going to die in a year. And all his people are going to die in a year. So that's bad, right? Good job, bad news. And then you go further, and you realize that all this stuff, his assassination attempt that he stopped, ends up being recognized. So he gets a parade, like a king's parade. He gets to run around, act like he's king for a day. And this is a good thing, right? And so he's leading around his parade, being paraded like a king. And it says in the scriptures that after the parade, you know where he's dropped back off? The king's gate. He's got to just go back to work. After all of that, he just goes back. It's like having a birthday. Everybody's saying happy birthday to you. Everybody's giving you presents, and the next day, just go back to work. Right? So, you know? By the way, you forgot this, and you forgot this, and then you just got to go back to work, and you realize that nobody works like you. Right? So one day he's good, one day he's bad. He has his highs, he has his lows. Mordecai seems to just go with the flow. Mordecai has learned the secret of trusting God. And I want to talk a little bit about this secret that I think we need to learn. It's called the secret of contentment. And this is something that Mordecai did. I want to just look at Mordecai's life. Mordecai seemed to wait on God's timing in his life. Mordecai had this ability to wait for God to do what God's going to do. This is the advice that he gave to Esther. And so it's interesting to me that when he's sitting at the king's gate, he finds out about an assassination attempt on the king. And I'm thinking to myself, if I were a guy who hated the king that was enslaving me, and he was being assassinated, maybe I don't talk about it. Maybe I just let that thing go. Maybe it's going to help Queen. I mean, Queen's right. She's the queen. So maybe she'll get some more power out of this. So why would I stop that assassination attempt? Why would he do that? Because it wasn't his time. And why did he tell Esther to go through what she went through? Because it's not your time. And it seems like every step of the way, he's waiting on God to come through on a promise that he made thousands of years ago to the Jewish people. You will be my people. I will be your God. I will take care of you. And they were threatening to wipe out Israel. They were going to wipe out their people. But there was a promise that God made that Mordecai was going to lean on. He was going to say, God, you promised that you would preserve our people. You promised that you would always be our God. And I'm going to trust that. And I know it looks bleak right now. But I'm just going to wait on you to do what you need to do. I'm going to wait on your timing on this. So let me ask you, do you have trouble with this? Do you wait on God's time? Or do you get impatient? Do you get impatient? Because I think a lot of times some of the bad decisions that we have made is when we go out on our own and do what we think is right. What we think will get us ahead. We're trying to push the envelope. Maybe we prayed and God's not kind of coming through. And so we decide to do our own thing. And the result is a bad decision. That hurts us. That hurts people around us. And if we had just waited on God's time and His will to be done. Do we push the envelope sometimes? I think he was faithful to what God called him to do. And that's something we have to do. We have to be faithful to what God has called us to. He was an advisor for Esther. He was the one that consistently stood outside the gate and gave her wisdom. Esther, this is what you do. Esther, this is what you do. Esther, here's my wisdom I'm going to impart on you. And he got Esther from slave to queen through his advice. And then when Esther needed a little pushing, a little prodding, when she was nervous about having, all this thing with her people being destroyed, he said, Esther, maybe God's put you in this for a time such as this. Maybe God's giving you this, and he's encouraging Esther to do something about it. Because that's what his role in her life is to be a wise counsel, is to sit at the king's gate and be a wise counsel. And that's the third thing that he was satisfied with where he was. He was sitting at the king's gate. She was in the castle. And I think for him, he wanted to fix everything about them, but he let Esther fix it. He said, Esther, this is not going to be done by me. I'm on the king's gate. That's where God's placed me. That's what I have to be. That's where I am. You're in the castle. So he stepped back and he let Esther be queen. He didn't interfere with that. He just gave her advice. But he stepped back and he said, Esther, if this is going to get done, I'm going to have to bend and I'm going to have to trust to let you lead this, Esther. And sometimes we have to just step back and realize that God's called us to a certain thing, but also God's called us to step back and let other people take the reign on certain things in our life that have to do with their happiness and have to do with their thing. And are we willing to be satisfied and faithful to daily faithfulness, just being faithful to what God has called us to what we are doing? Or do we push the envelope? And are you faithful when God says, this is not your thing? You need to step back and you need to trust that I have other people in place to assure this is happening. And that's what he did. He let Esther lead. Do we do these things? Now here's the thing that I want to say before I end. Is that I told you that there's this thing that maybe you realize this is my bad day, right? I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, okay? Because you may look at that and go, you know what? Let's see, who's made me anxious, angry, and depressed? My kids. Who has led me to make a bad decision? Well, I cursed yesterday and then I spanked them. Bad decision. It's hurt me, I said, and I've hurt them. Yeah, and then who's led? Yeah, so I can very easily fill in that bad egg. All my kids are bad eggs. All my kids. So I just need to get rid of them. If I want to be happy. That's not true. That's not true. Not everything in your life that's a bad egg is a bad egg because it's there, okay? That's why I highlighted in your notes, you, okay? If you'll notice, I put you in red up there because you were the one that made it to Easter egg. You were the one that made the bad decision. You were the one that hurt yourself and other people. That's on you. And I'm not saying that kids are bad. If that's something that maybe you thought, maybe if I have kids, I'll finally be happy. Maybe if I get married or find a boyfriend or have that relationship. And I'm not saying, I filled in that blank, honey, and I think that's you. I have to get rid of you. You're a bad egg in my life, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is maybe you need to give that marriage, those kids, your job, your money, your happiness, and give it to God. That's contentment. I'm just going to be faithful in my marriage. I'm going to be called to do what I'm called to do. If I'm called to love my wife, then I need to do that. And I need to be faithful in that. And she's called to love me, so I'm just going to let her do that. I'm called to be a parent. And if that's where God's put me, then I need to be faithful in that. And there's some things that I can't do that I'm going to have to trust that it's going to get done somehow else. Look, I'm called to a good life. I'm called to make money. Sure, I'm called to have a comfortable life maybe. But if I'm not, then I'm going to have to trust that God's going to take care of me. Sometimes my income's going to be good. Sometimes my income's going to be bad. Sometimes God's going to bless me with money. Sometimes I'm going to have to pay a lot of money out. But in the good times and the bad times, I'm just going to have to give my money to God. And I'm going to have to be faithful to do what God's called me to do with that. So contentment is ultimately about taking whatever that blank is for you. That thing that makes you depressed, that thing that makes you angry, that thing that's led you to make bad decisions, and the thing that's hurting you, and the things that hurt the people around you, and just say, God, here, I'm going to give it to you. Your will be done in my life. And I'm going to let you have, because you created the game. You created this. It's yours. And ultimately, my happiness is going to have to come from you. And that's ultimately what he said in the book of James. He said, we pray to God, but we don't get what we want. And we pray because we have the wrong motives. But if you were just content in God. And so that's my challenge. Because the absence of contentment in your life is going to be conflict. I promise you. The absence of contentment is conflict. It will bring you conflict. So, where is there conflict in your life? That's ultimately what I want to ask you. Where are you finding conflict? What do you need to give to God? I'm going to pray for you, and then we'll have an invitation. Father, we come to you now. And Father, we know that we have things in our lives that we want, and things in our lives. Father, you know us. You know our hearts, and you know our desires. So, Father, I pray that as we come into this time of invitation, we're able to look at our lives and we're able to identify the things that are bringing us pain and suffering, the people around us, the things that are bringing conflict. I pray for each one of us that we would be able to give it to you. It's in your son's name. Amen. As our prayer team comes forward, I want to ask you a question, and maybe challenge you a little bit to say this. Maybe the reason that there is conflict in our lives is because we have conflict between us and our Savior. Maybe the conflict is between you and God. And maybe the reason that you're afraid to give Him whatever it is you're wanting to give Him is because there is conflict there. I want to invite you to settle that conflict between you and God. Maybe you were very easily to put up whatever it is in that blank. Maybe it is finances or a relationship in your life or something that you're just shooting for, something that you are really stressed about right now. What I want to do is invite you up, and we're just wanting to pray with you this morning that you will be able to give that to God. That you will, whatever it is that is bringing you hardship, whatever it is that is hurting you and the people around you, I just challenge you to come up and pray. God, I'm just going to give that to you. I'm going to wait on your time. And I want to be faithful. And I want to step back when I need to step back. And just be faithful to what you call me to do. So as we stand and sing, that's my invitation.
Here I lay.